we have already discussed about the different methods of absorbing overheads. Absorption of overhead, that's the last portion or the last part we have to deal with. We have already seen that 4 or 5 types. The last method of absorption of overhead is the last one which I am going to teach, that is mission hour rate. How to calculate the mission hour rate. That is the most important point I want to deal with. What is mission hour rate? It is the cost of running the machine for 1 hour. This is the most important method used for absorption of factory overheads. This method is used where machines play a very important role in factory. That is, work is done mainly with the help of machines and not with manual labor. How to calculate the mission hour rate? Mission hour rate is calculated by dividing the total running expense of the machine by the number of hours. It is divided by the number of hours for which the machine is expected to run during that period, during that particular period. There is a definition given for mission hour rate. That is, mission hour rate is actual or predetermined rate of cost apportionment. It can be actual rate or a predetermined rate, or overhead absorption. It can be either for overhead apportionment or for overhead absorption. How to find out? It is calculated by dividing the total machine cost by the number of hours for which the machine is expected to run. There are 2 types of machine hours. One is simple mission hour rate and the other is comprehensive mission hour rate. What is the difference between the simple mission hour rate and the comprehensive mission hour rate? In simple mission hour rate, we are taking all expenses except the wages paid to the machine operators. The direct wages paid to machine operators, that is not taken into account in simple SIMPLE, not single but simple mission hour rate. In comprehensive mission hour rate, we are taking the direct wages paid to or wages paid to the machine operators also. That means all expenses incurred for running the machines plus direct wages paid to the machine operators. Now we have to see what are the steps involved in computing the mission hour rate. What are the steps involved? First of all, you have to apportion the various overhead expenses to different production departments. That is, apportionment of overhead expenses to different production departments. Then, second step is overhead expenses incurred in a department that can further be apportioned to various production mission centers. What do you mean by mission center? A mission center may be either a single mission or it can be a group of missions, or it can be a group of missions. Then overhead expenses charged to mission centers, that can be divided into 2. One is standing charges. It is also called as fixed expenses. And the other is mission expenses. It is called as variable expenses. What do you mean by standing charges or fixed expenses? Expenses which are incurred like rent, rates, insurance, then lighting and heating, general expenses, supervisor's salary. All these come under standing expenses or fixed charges. That means those expenses which are not directly related to machines, they come under standing charges. Formerly, the method of dividing distinction was fixed charges and variable charges. Now it is called as standing charges and machine expenses. Standing charges or fixed expenses, I have given examples for that. Machine expenses usually mean expenses which are directly related to machines. They are variable in nature and they are called depreciation. Examples are depreciation, repairs and maintenance, power, steam and water, etc. All these. So the important point when you calculate the machine hour rate is all expenses have to be segregated into standing charges and machine expenses. Standing charges are also called as fixed charges and machine expenses are also called as variable expenses. Now we have divided the expenses into variable expenses and machine expenses, the standing charges and machine expenses. Next step is how many hours the machine has worked during the period. That is calculated from the machine cost center. How many machine hours worked during the period? When you calculate the machine hours, you have to unproductive hours that should be avoided. Unproductive hours means, for example, hours used for setting up the machine. That is not productive. So unproductive hours should be excluded while calculating the machine hours worked. Now the next step is standing charges or fixed charges per hour is calculated by dividing the total standing charges by the machine hours for that machine center. I shall repeat it once more. Standing charges per hour is calculated by dividing the total standing charges divided by machine hours. Then, when you deal with machine expenses, you have to find out the hourly rate for each of the machine expenses. Not in standing charges, you are taking the total expenses incurred. But for machine expenses, for each of the item, you are taking the hourly rate calculated for each of the machine. Then the last step, you have to add both the standing charges per hour and the machine expenses per hour. That will give you the machine hour rate. We have already discussed about factory overheads. Now we have to deal with the absorption of administration overheads. When you deal with the administration overheads, first of all, I should want to discuss about what is administrative overheads. Administration overheads or administrative overheads relates to all indirect expenses incurred in connection with general administration of the concern. All indirect expenses incurred in connection with the general administration of the concern. So general administration expenses include expenses incurred for formulation of policy, directing and controlling the operations of a business, of an organization. So administration overhead means expenses, all indirect expenses incurred for formulation of policy, as well as expenses incurred in directing and controlling the operations of an organization. I shall give you some examples for these administrative expenses. For example, office salary, office rent, rates and insurance of the office, then depreciation of office building, insurance of office building, then repairs of office building, furniture, then bank charges, postages, etc., etc. Then how you can deal with these administrative overheads in cost accounts? What we have already seen is how we can deal with the factory overheads. Now how we can deal with the administrative overheads in cost accounts. There are three ways of dealing. One is the administrative overheads can be directly charged to costing P&L account. It can be directly debited to costing profit and loss account. When it is charged directly to costing P&L account, it does not form part of the cost of production. It doesn't form part of the cost of production. But this can be applied only when administrative overheads are nominal or it's a small value. When the administrative overheads come a large amount, you cannot. So what I have explained, I will sum up. When the administration overhead or administrative expenses of small amount, what we are doing is it is directly charged to costing profit and loss account. That is one way of dealing with administrative expenses. Next one is administrative expenses can be apportioned to production as well as sales. Administrative overheads are usually incurred for assisting production as well as sales. It helps in promoting production and sales. Hence, administrative expenses is apportioned between production department and selling and distribution department. When it is charged to production department and selling and distribution department, selling and distribution overhead, or it is apportioned to production overhead and selling and distribution overhead, it is charged to production. It is charged to products along with the production, selling and distribution overheads. That is another method. That is selling and distribution, office and administration overhead, that is charged to production as well as selling and distribution departments. Third method is it can be charged to cost of production through different absorption rate. Absorption rates you have already seen. The selling and distribution overheads will be absorbed by the units manufactured, or it will be added to cost of production or separate items of cost. Then different rates that is applicable for absorption of selling and distribution cost of production. Office and administration overhead is percentage of factory cost, then percentage of factory overheads, percentage of sales, etc. Now we have seen how to deal with the selling and distribution overheads. Next comes selling and distribution overhead. What do you mean by selling and distribution overhead? Selling and distribution overhead means overhead expenses or indirect costs incurred for attracting the customers, for creating demand for the products, and also for retaining the customers. Expenses incurred for attracting the customers, retaining the customers, and thereby creating demand for the products. That is selling overhead. Then distribution overhead refers to cost incurred for transferring the product from the producer to the consumer. Cost incurred for transferring the product from the producer to the consumer. That is what you call as distribution. Although it comes as selling and distribution overhead, Selling overhead is cost incurred for attracting the customer, for retaining the customer, and for creating a demand for the product. But distribution overhead refers to the cost incurred in transferring the product from the producer to the ultimate consumer. Although these two are dealt in cost accounts together. Let us see some of the examples for this selling overhead. Advertising, salaries and commission, or sales staff, traveling expenses. Then come showroom expenses, bad debts, transport charges, warehousing expenses, etc. How you will deal that you have already studied these selling and distribution overheads. Now let us see how you will deal with this selling and distribution overheads. One is rate per article. Rate per article means the total selling and distribution overhead is divided by the estimated number of units to be sold. How much is the total selling and expenses incurred? That is divided by the number of units to be sold. Then you will get the rate per article. That is one method. Second method is, it is calculated as a percentage of sales. It is calculated as a percentage of sales. Here, overhead expenses is charged to the cost as a percentage of sales. For example, selling and distribution overhead comes 40% of sales, 10% of sales, or 40 or 10, 20 or 10% of sales. Then that will be added. That percentage will be calculated with the help of the previous year's figure, and it will be added with the cost of the product. That is another method. Then another method for calculating, the third method is, it is calculated as a percentage of factory cost. How much is the selling and distribution overhead divided by factory cost? Then you will get the percentage of factory cost. When you get the factory cost, suppose the factory cost is 1 lakh, and the percentage of selling and distribution overhead is 20%, then 20,000 will be the selling and distribution overhead. Now we have finished up to that. Now we have to deal with the under and over absorption of overhead. That is a stock question for the examination. What is under absorption and over absorption of overheads? When the overhead absorbed in cost accounts is more than the actual overhead. You know that in cost accounts, overhead is absorbed there are different rates for absorption of overhead. For example, direct material cost, direct labor cost, prime cost, factory machine hour rate, labor hour rate, etc., etc. When overhead is absorbed in cost accounts on a percentage basis, the actual overhead absorbed in cost accounts may be more than the overhead absorbed in cost accounts may be more than the actual overhead. When the overhead absorbed in cost accounts is more than the actual overhead, it is what you call as over absorption. When the overhead absorbed in cost accounts is less than the actual overhead incurred, that is what you call as under absorption of overhead. This under absorption, under recovery, we can also call it as over recovery or under recovery of overheads. What are the reasons for this under recovery or over recovery of overheads? The reasons may be errors in estimating the overheads, then errors in estimating the output, then difference in working hours, change in method of production, seasonal fluctuations in production, volume of production, then underutilization or utilization of plant capacity. These are some of the reasons for underabsorption or overabsorption of overheads. Now, we have to treat with certain special overhead items. Treatment of special overhead items. One is depreciation. What is depreciation? What is depreciation? Depreciation, you know, depreciation is the diminution in the value of an asset used to wear and tear or due to a fluctuation of time. A fluctuation of time or passage of time. There are two main reasons for depreciation. One is depreciation due to wear and tear. That is what you call as usage. Depreciation of an asset due to usage of that asset. The second reason is effluxion of time, effluxion, that is passage of time. Suppose an asset is put to more use, the depreciation will be greater. Suppose you are not using an asset at all, even that asset will have a depreciation. That is due to passage of time. But the two reasons for depreciation, one is due to wear and tear. That is when you are using a machine for a long period, for much time, there will be greater depreciation. And even if you are not using a machine at all, there will be depreciation for that is due to passage of time. How to treat with depreciation in cost accounts? First of all, you have to calculate the expected life of the machine. How much is the cost? How much is the scrap value? From the cost of the machine, you have to deduct the scrap value. Then you have to divide it by the expected time or expected hours for which the machine is worked. Then you will get the depreciation to be charged on that machine. A suitable amount is charged every year to the cost of production. A suitable amount is charged to the cost of production every year as depreciation. Here, without charging depreciation, you can also ascertain the correct amount of profit or loss. Depreciation may form part of factory overhead, or it may form part of administrative overhead, or it may form part of selling and distribution overheads. That depends upon where the asset is situated and where the asset is put to use. For example, insurance, depreciation on factory, depreciation on machinery used in factory. For example, depreciation of factory building, then plant and machinery used in factory, they are treated as factory overheads. They are charged as factory overheads. Depreciation of office building, furniture and fixtures used in office, they are treated as, or they are charged to administration overheads. Then depreciation on showroom, warehouse, delivery van, delivery vehicles, etc. They are charged to selling and distribution overheads. So much about depreciation. Now we have to deal with what is obsolescence. Definition: it is a function of time. Depreciation may be due to wear and tear, a function of time. Obsolescence, that is also one of the reasons for, that is one of the factors that causes depreciation. Obsolescence occurs when a new asset is introduced in place of the old one, and the old one has to be discarded before its full useful life. What is obsolescence? A new machine is introduced and the old one has to be discarded before its useful life. Then obsolescence occurs. It is generally caused due to the introduction of new and improved models over the existing assets. There are two ways for treating obsolescence. One, if we can foresee obsolescence, അതായത് മുൻകൂട്ടി കാണാൻ സാധിച്ചാൽ. Suppose we can see this obsolescence earlier. This is treated as overheads along with the depreciation. That means depreciation will be charged at a higher rate. Suppose we cannot foresee this depreciation, then it is treated as an abnormal loss and it will be debited to costing profit and loss account. Next point is interest on capital. What is interest? Interest is the reward for the use of capital. There are two types of interest on capital. One is interest paid on borrowed capital and interest on own capital. Own capital means സ്വന്തം മൂലധനത്തിന്. Interest on borrowed capital, that is charged to a cost of the product. That is charged to a cost of the product and it is treated as an item of overhead. But in the case of own capital or notional capital, notional interest, interest on capital, that is no interest paid on as that is treated, that is notional interest. For notional interest, there are two opinions whether it should be included in cost or not. Notional capital should be included in cost or not. One opinion is that interest on own capital, that should also be included in cost to arrive at the correct amount of profit. But many accountants argue that notional capital should not be included in cost because it is not an expenditure that is paid in cash, so it should not be included in cost. Suppose you want to arrive at the correct cost of output of a product, then interest on own capital, that should also be included in the cost of production. Now, what about DA paid? DA may be paid, dearness allowance may be paid either to direct workers as well as indirect workers. DA paid to direct workers, that will be treated as direct wages, and DA paid to indirect workers, that will be treated as factory overheads. Then DA paid to office workers, that will form part of administration overhead. So much about that.